Welcome back to Midlife Unfiltered. I'm Donna. This is my co-host, Nicola.
Hi, everybody. Today we have the amazing honor to sit down with Marcel LeBlanc. She is a conversation architect and has discovered that one honest conversation can save a woman years and years of resentment, years of loneliness, and the quiet grief of not being seen, and years spent building a life with the wrong person or the right person, but in the wrong way. After surviving an unhealthy marriage and infidelity and a devastating divorce, she took the path of an unexpected turn through more than a decade of conversations with thousands of women. She built a business and she's beginning the same painful pattern over and over again. Welcome, Marcel. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. A solid 10. Happy to be here.
Thank you for
Well, we are
coming.
happy to have you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, Marcel, the conversation architect, and what I absolutely love to see is strong, educated women who are thriving in their career. They've discovered a life partner they love, they're aligned with. They're really fostering that common language. But what I find through the years, and this is the part that I really hate to see, is that a lot of these women end up blowing up their entire lives because they don't treat the most important decision that they're ever going to make, which is their life partner, the way that they should. And a lot of these ladies know that their relationship is on borrowed time and they don't have the skill or don't want to have that one conversation that can either fix it and deepen the relationship or keep it from being a painful mistake. And I lived that experience. I don't know if, people come to mind when I say those words, but I'm really passionate about helping them to get through that. And that's with not months of therapy, but it's with short-term engagement that helps him to admit that they have to have a conversation and what that conversation is. And my focus is when we stop analyzing the other person or people in our lives and we begin to look inward. What are we doing now? What do we want? What are we tolerating? What are we avoiding? Years ago, I had an executive coach that came to me and he says, Marcel, he says, you prefer to look directly into the sun instead of the mirror. And he says, how long are you going to go ahead and do that? He says, because when you start to look into the mirror, he says, then we can make some really great changes together. And that willingness, that set me on a path of really focusing on what I wanted, what my values were, what I aligned with, who I spent my time with, how I spent time. There's a saying that we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And, even though I went through a really bad divorce and there was infidelity there, the infidelity was the giant explosion at the end. The real damage was the 10 years of life that I lost, during that time. And that came from not knowing what I wanted, inherited values from my family, would look good from the outside. I wanted to be a good wife, a good student, a good daughter. And it ended me up, I ended up in a place that just wasn't right for me. Well, the first thing is figuring out what you want. A lot of times as women, we're not taught to know what we want. We get good at guessing what other people want.
Yeah.
We
True.
feel guilty about, what we want, we desire, and we never come to that. So the first step is to figure out what we value, not what our parents value, not what looks good from the outside. And then and come to the realization that, let me see how this goes. So when we decide to have a conversation, if we have a conversation, we get the courage to say something scary. If we don't prepare, then what happens is every disappointment and hurt that we've felt for the last 6 months or 2 years gets squeezed out into just one moment. And, when we've been having this conversation in our head with our therapists, with our friends during margaritas, or, when no one's looking and we're on the computer, doing Google. And so when this moment comes and we squeeze out all of these things, he's only been having this conversation for the last 5 minutes. And so how do we keep it to where it's just one conversation while it's still one conversation, and do that successfully at a time? And what happens is it builds a muscle of confidence, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. And does that work for any relationship, not just like, a husband and a wife? Does it work for a friendship? keeping the conversation between the two of you and not, like you say, in your head or, letting it spin around for 10 million times before you actually speak to the person?
That's a great question. And absolutely. At Velvet Box, I have 30 something women that work for me, and there is not a moment where there might be some kind of conflict. So
Yeah. Yeah,
we
sure.
do a modified version in the retail stores. I have my executive team that when we meet, we start learning values, and it's really, as young women, I'm just so passionate that if they come to work for me, if they leave better and more educated and have more self-leadership and confidence than when they started, then for me, that's an absolute success. And
Yeah.
so we use a version of these skills as an executive team and then also on the sales floor.
You said something earlier about, having a conversation in your mind, but then, not you're talking about your relationship with your husband and how, his conversation 5 minutes, but you're like, you wasted all that time. I had a friend when her younger sister had been engaged for many, many years, never got married. She got engaged, she got married very quickly. And this other sister getting married turned the light bulb on in the younger sister's head and go, wait a minute, I need to have a conversation with my so-called fiance because we're not going anywhere. Nothing is happening. And she just, they ended up breaking it off because she was like, I wasted all of this time. I'm like, you didn't waste because at the beginning, you guys were happy, but somewhere along the line, things just, you became comfortable and you never really thought you were okay with it until you saw somebody else that you loved, get married. And then you're like, but, she's happily married now. But, it was hard for her because she just thought everything that she had been with this person for 6 or 7 years, like left in a heartbeat, gone because he
Well,
said, I didn't want to get married. I mean, apparently he did, but then somewhere along the line, he changed his mind, but he never, I guess, broke it off. Didn't know how, didn't want to, or I don't know.
Well, and for me, the clues had always been there in my marriage. I got married and he traveled out of town for work,
Okay.
and the garage door would close and I would pretend to still be asleep. And by the time the garage door closed, I'd pop out of bed, grateful that I had a couple days with the dog. And, somebody asked us one time, we were at dinner, do you want to have kids? And he said yes. And I said no at the same time. And, I never thought, I didn't have the tools, back then to get curious and figure out what that meant. And, in reality, if looking back, I was protecting a version of a story that I wanted to be true. And the good wife and the good daughter. And, I'm resilient. We work through these things, we tough it out. And hindsight was absolutely merciless because, looking back, we weren't aligned.
Right.
And if I can help anybody and be that light for someone that I wish I had at that age, I would love to do that. I'll tell you a story about this girl, Lauren, that I was talking to, and she used the term slow death. And they were, recently engaged and bought a condo together. And as she's starting to, explain what's going on in her relationship, it was clear that they were strangers in the same house. When you have dinner and you're on Instagram scrolling, they each like their own Netflix shows. So they went into their separate rooms so that they can watch their Netflix shows. And some nights she told me, she says, there's these awkward silences and I just go to bed early. And so as she's laying there, she's having these one-sided conversations and she thinks, you know what, maybe I'm going to break up. Maybe we'll separate. And that feels way too catastrophic to her. So on the other night, she's convinced herself this is just good enough. This is normal. This is what everybody else is doing.
Right.
And so on a call, I asked her, I said, Lauren, what do you want? And she gave me many examples of more connection, intimacy, happiness. And so it wasn't the fact that she didn't know what she wanted. It was admitting to herself that without any of these things in the future, that the resentment would set in, and so would the distance between them. And so I asked her, I said, let's look 10 years from now. What does future Lauren look like in 10 years? And she immediately starts crying. And she says, I don't want it to be like this in 10 years. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And then if I do something, it's going to be a big fight.
Yeah.
So what we did was we picked one thing that was important to her and we crafted a conversation around just that one thing. And so when the big moment came and she finally sat down and had the courage to say it, do you know what he said?
No.
I felt it too.
Oh, I was just going to ask you that. I was just going to
I
ask
felt
you.
it too. And
Yeah.
so, that gave her so much confidence that she
Yeah.
continued to incrementally be honest in their relationship.
Okay.
And it didn't fix the entire relationship, but what it did do is crack that silence
Yeah.
and in the secret suffering that we go through. And later she says, I thought I would be breaking us up, but I was restarting us. I had to go first.
Yes. I think, do you think that, and then this can go both ways, obviously, do you think a lot of men and women sometimes overthink what they want to say because they don't want to hurt their partner, whether it's their boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife? Do you think that sometimes they're like, oh, if I bring this up, what's it going to do? Maybe I'll just keep it to myself. In reality, if they ask a question like your friend did, it actually helps the relationship more.
Absolutely. These women, I talk about there's two categories that I feel like I've found women fall into: the women who ask and the women who hope. So the women who ask know what they want, and they ask for it. And the women who hope are managing this resentment and this disappointment and this disconnection. And they would never describe themselves as hopeful women. These are incredibly talented women, that they're strong women. They're managing, large companies. But what they would describe themselves as thoughtful and compassionate, and definitely not wanting to hurt their partner's feelings.
Yeah.
But as we know, it's really hard for men to read our minds.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet one, and it's just so much easier. I have another great story, to give you an example of this, that really, when we were having classes at Velvet Box, there would be these lectures. Our therapist would teach a lecture, and we had one particular one. There was about 60 people in the class, and she gave everybody a handout, and there was like a stick figure on it, and they had crayons. So one had a red, gold, and yellow, green crayon. So the red crayon is you marked where you didn't like to be touched, green where you like to be touched, yellow was neutral. And if you were there with a partner, you swap papers. And so I hear this gentleman go, oh my God. And so it really caught my attention. I walk over there just to kind of see what's going on. And they had swapped papers. And he says, we've been married 24 years. And her ears were all marked red. And it wasn't the ears, but it was the 24 years that got my attention. Like, clearly there was love there, but clearly there was also maybe a lack of language.
Yeah.
That 24 years, something that I'm sure she was being thoughtful. Maybe he would figure it out. We're waiting for him to figure it out. Maybe if I, make this gesture or I, sigh a certain kind of way, he's going to get it. And that just really, I thought was, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah. Well, what about like when, a couple has like a conversation, they're having like a disconnect, right? And either the man or the woman is trying to get the conversation going and get the relationship back to where they would like it to be, or, mature it, but then they always fall back into their old ways. So it might start off, okay, we're both going to work on this together, and it might start off, and then they fall back into their old ways, and they're back in two different rooms watching two different TV shows.
Well, it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. And that's why I recommend that you prepare. You even write it down. If you're going to have this conversation with anyone that's important to you, bring your notes. It takes courage to prepare for a conversation, and you be honest and say, hey, look, this is really important to me. So I have my notes here. And so I'm going to follow so that I make sure that I say things the way that they should be said. And when you say it, a lot of times women, one of the things that happens is it's very vulnerable to have these types of conversations.
Yeah.
And so we get nervous. We want to pivot. We start to edit the second the words start to leave our mouth. And so it's important to stay on track. And then when you've delivered this message, just stop talking. Give it some time and let the other person respond. Because I've been known to do this, where you get nervous and you fill all of the space, and then the point never sees the light of day.
Right.
You know? And it's very difficult, and it's important to stay on track, use the right words, think about it and prepare, because sometimes if we let our emotions get the best of us and we don't do this preparation, it ends up, how often do we sometimes have a fight where we're going, you always, or you never? Well, that turns sort of into a character assassination, and it's almost impossible for a person not to get defensive.
Exactly.
Yes, that is true because my husband always used to interrupt me when I would be talking, and I'm like, so now I'm like, I need to tell you something, but I need you not to interrupt me. Don't speak until I am done. And he'd be like, okay. I'm like, no, please. And he'd be like, okay. So then I'll go and I'll talk, and then I'll stop. He's like, done? I'm like, yes, I'm done. He's like, okay. Because before he'd be like, I'm like, I wasn't finished. If you'd let me just finish speaking, you wouldn't know what I was trying to say. Okay, sorry. That's what
I
I
mean,
tell him.
you have to let people know in real time. You have to let your
Yeah.
partner know in real time,
Yeah.
what's been bothering you. I had
Mhm.
somebody the other day that asked me, well, I mean, it's not romantic. It's not spontaneous. Well, if he's missing all of the things that you were hoping he'd guess, how much fun is it now? You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
it would be even really great. I've had somebody that said, I mean, he never thinks of these things, and it just didn't go well, and I was expecting all of these things. And so you could just have a conversation, said, the next time I talk to my mother on the phone, I'm going to be upset. And so you take that right-hand turn next to Central Market, and they have a flower thing, and the roses are
Right.
$2.
Or
Can you grab 3 roses? Every time I talk to my mother, I'm going to be upset. And I love the pink roses from there. Like, could you do that for me? Like, why wouldn't he do that? I mean, how much simpler and more amazing would his life be if he just did that?
Yeah.
He's like, okay, this is what success is going to look like. I'm not going to have to try and talk her down off of all these things. This is what it's going to look like. You just let him know.
I think that, and I've learned this because I've been married for 21 years, that I always have to remember that my husband isn't going to remember this. He's not going to remember that because his mind is, I got to provide for, all the kids, got to get 2 kids to school. I've got mortgage, that's where I'm always like, so I always tell people, I'm like, they're like, oh, he didn't get this for you for your anniversary. And I'm like, I didn't want anything. And if I did want something and if he forgot, I'm not going to be upset because I know that he is working very hard to provide for the family. And I always say, I'm like, because he's, he's the money maker. I always have to say that and we own our own business, that his mind is, trying to, make things work, trying to provide for the employees, trying to do this, try to do that. But I said, so if he forgets something, I'm not going to fault him for it because I know that he's showing love in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's about getting to know someone.
Yeah.
And, if it is really important to you, like
Yeah.
my birthday, if your birthday is the most important day of the
Mhm.
year, you need to tell that to someone going,
Yeah.
my birthday is the most important day of the year to me. And so here's what I'd like you to do. And here's what's going to happen. Set an alarm on your phone, October 12th every year. Set it, 2 days ahead. And these are the things that are going to happen. And I think if someone loves you and wants to have a successful relationship, I'm not sure why they wouldn't do those things. It's a partnership. We have partnership agreements in work, and
Mhm.
all of that in businesses. We spell all of that out. What happens when there's a cash crunch?
Mhm.
It's all spelled out. What happens when there's a disagreement? It's all spelled out, and it's something ahead of time. It can only set things up for success.
Yeah. Do you think that, because you were talking earlier about how you didn't want children, but your then husband at the time wanted children. Do you think that women will go, okay, I guess I'll have a kid just because he wants a kid, but I don't want a kid, but I want to have a child to maybe it will help make the relationship work. And we're not even having these children, like just something in general. They're like, I don't really want to do this, but I'm going to do this because this is what so-and-so wants, whether they're moving across the country, buying a house, doing this. Do you think a lot of people do that? And obviously I know it obviously is going to make things worse, or, they're not going to be happy. And I would think.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, my parents had, or I don't think my mom wanted kids, and my dad wanted 6, and,
Yeah.
and I mean, if you want to look at the modeling of misalignment,
Mhm.
and it's not my parents' fault. They had a model before that. And so I saw what, my dad was Catholic. I mean, got married and we died married and no one got divorced. I didn't know anyone that had gotten divorced.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that was so foreign. I
Yeah.
remember looking up one time when, in the phone book, and I'm going, there's a divorce attorney. I met somebody and I'm like, is that a possibility? I mean, and I called one time and then I hung up. But, I was modeled where this is what we do. We make hard compromises and we grit it out and we tough it out.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is. And I think that it could be a lot easier than that. And that ease comes with one, knowing what you want. And once we know what we want, I'm a country girl. I'm going to explain it. I was looking the other day, somebody was building some fence. And, when you dig a post hole and you drop that post in,
Yep.
it's kind of wobbling around. You can't hang anything on it.
Mhm.
And then as you pack it in and pour some concrete, it becomes way more stable. And I liken that to knowing who you are. When you know who you are and you know what your values are and you're really strong in those things, then it becomes very easy on how to respond to people and who you're going to spend time with and how you're going to spend that time. When I did that, I immediately looked at my calendar and said, when I took about 6 weeks and I just worked on my core values. And when those were so solid, immediately I opened up my calendar and I'm going, I don't want to this does not align with me. This person doesn't align with me. And I've crafted my days according to, what's important to me in my life. Where I'm going to spend our time is, we don't have all the time in the world. We don't have all the time in the day. So what are you going to be doing? What's the most important things that you're going to be doing in your day and in your life? And so when you get solid, like that fence post, then you could start hanging wire on it and all the other things, which is your family, health, parents, and you can confidently say, when you know those things, what you will do and not do, what you're going to tolerate, what you're going to engage in or avoid. Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yes.
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 Do you think that comes with maturity, trial and error? Like you say, back in the day, we were told in your 20s, you get married, you do this and that. Maybe we're not as mature or ready to take those, hard choices and make those decisions. So do we have to make those mistakes first before we can move forward?
Well, guaranteed I knew everything when I was 22. I knew everything.
So do my children.
I knew everything. And then fast forward, I realized the more I'm around, the less I know. And it has to be intentional. You have to decide to not let, Jim Rohn says, it's about the set of the sail and what your philosophy is going to be. Jim Rohn was a very famous motivational and inspirational speaker in the 70s. I highly recommend people look him up. And that's your philosophy and what your mindset's going to be. And in order to develop that, you need help. I just don't think that people I didn't do this alone. 100% I did not do this alone. This was a path that required intentionality. It required help. It required coaching and all of that stuff. So yes, it takes wisdom over years. I learned a lot, but as people, we don't have to drive down the same road and hit every pothole all over again and make the same mistakes. I mean, we just really don't. There are plenty of books. I mean, you don't even need to hire me to do this. You can go to my website and download the tools and at least start there. It shows you how to walk yourself through this conversation, do it with a friend, but you have to be intentional and you definitely can't do it alone.
You have to want it also.
You have to have the desire.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I have a question for you. So if there's a lady, and I know this can go both ways, but we're talking about women. So if you're a man, just switch the gender and you're good to go. If you know that you are in the wrong relationship, like you just know you both aren't happy, but you're like almost like, if I leave, what? Because if you're in a relationship for so long, that change can be very, very scary because you're just like, oh gosh, what ifs? What would you tell somebody who in their heart, they know they're in the wrong relationship or that relationship is over, but taking that next step can be very scary?
Well, it can be scary and it can be a tough road. For my experience it was forced upon me.
Yeah.
So I really didn't have much of a choice. I didn't give it a lot of thought, but I have had many close friends that have said, I'm waiting for the kids to graduate.
I've heard
I
so many
am,
times.
and we've been married for 20 something years, but as
Mhm.
soon as this thing happens, and, there's people out there, people like me that will, walk this path with you and help you. We are terrible historians of our own lives. And I do something called, I call it a vista break.
Okay.
And it's important for women and people in general to stop and look back to see how many things that they've accomplished in their lives. Because we're so busy always moving forward, forward, forward. If you're a hiker, you're looking down and going up, up, up. There's always going to be another mountain. But if
Right.
you just stop for a minute and turn around and look back at all of the things that you've accomplished, you see this amazing vista. And you also see all the mountains that you've already climbed and all the hard things that you've already achieved. So, I believe people can do anything that they set their mind to.
Yeah.
It's true. I guess we really do have to stop and think about our accomplishments. I think a lot of people, we have a lot of like negative energy in our mind,
Mhm.
and you don't remember or realize all of the things that you've done to make you who you are, and how
Yeah.
that we should be proud of ourselves.
I think
I
it
think
comes
we
back
We
have
to
to forget.
forget.
identity.
We forget. I started journaling years ago, and when I was challenged by a coach to journal gratitude every day, one page of gratitude. And you started out with, well, it's hard to fill a page. So it forces you to go and look. So after a couple of days of that, I'm going, I got to fill this page. I better walk out the door and be looking for some good stuff to write down. I better be looking for it. Was the coffee exactly like I ordered it? Did all these things happen? Was my lunch exceptional? Did I learn something new? But what I also did after a couple years is I started another journal, and it says great things that happened this year. And every few days or once a week, something memorable, really memorable that's worth writing down happens. And if you go back and look, all the things that I forgot, you hit a challenge.
Sure.
Or, I show horses competitively, and sometimes you just hit a streak where some days I wonder, what am I doing? Do I even remember how to ride? What is happening? But then I look back and I'm like, 4 weeks ago, I marked these super high scores every day in a row. We had all these great things happened, and I forgot. And
Yeah.
my awareness was just only staying in the negative part. And so, that was proof right there for me that I need to continue to write this stuff down and reflect on it and go, if you're having a kind of a low day, go back a couple of pages going, hey, I forgot that happened. That was
Yeah.
just a month ago.
What a great idea. Great idea for younger people to do that and
Yes, my
start
kids
it at a younger age.
journaling. My girls
I,
love
I can't say enough about it, writing down, because what it does is it trains you to look for more things. There's that
journaling.
study about looking for a yellow car or a red car on the freeway. And then when
Yes.
your awareness goes there, then all of a sudden you start to see it. Well, why wouldn't we do that about good things in our life?
Yep.
Gratitude,
Yep.
and that'll get you into a better space for you to be able to handle all of these challenges as well.
Yeah. You mentioned, well, we see it. I reread it in your bio that you sent us. You talked about how your then husband was responsible for all the financial things in your house. And when you were married and you never had to do that. So when you got divorced, obviously you then were like, oh, here it is. I know there's a lot of people out there in the world that have separate accounts. They want to do their own thing. And then there are some that have shared accounts, but they don't know anything. Like, obviously, I know everything in my house because my husband's like, here we go. We're having a sit down conversation. Like, even our kids, he's like, guys, let's sit down. So my kids know everything. They're 14 through, they'll be 20. The oldest will be 20 on Sunday. They know everything because he's like, this is what's there. Just, he always says, in case something happens to him or happens to me or happens to both of us, they know. So what would you say to a woman who might be in this relationship where they know nothing because their significant other has said, nope, I'll take care of it?
Well, pick up a book. I mean, you could go on there, you can get on Chat GPT and give it some context and say, hey, I'm in a relationship where I'm a little bit nervous and I
Yeah.
don't know I don't know what goes on. What
Yeah.
are the first three things, and what is a book that I need to pick up today so that I can read? You go on Amazon, you buy a book for $10 and educate yourself. If you have a
Yeah.
financial advisor, there's plenty of women financial advisors
Hmm.
out there that I bet you if you called up and said, hey, this is my situation and I want to learn about A, B, and C. Can I schedule a discovery call with you or meeting with you for 30 minutes? Can you walk me through somebody in my situation and what we need to know and learn? Or just point me in the direction.
Yeah, I had a friend a few years ago, maybe like 6 years ago. I think it was around COVID. They were both working, but he obviously was the one had the he was bringing in the most money, and they went through divorce. And she looked at the paper, so she goes, "I don't know what I'm looking at." She said he always dealt with everything. She's like, "I don't know what this is," and I looked at her and I was like, "You're gonna have to find somebody that's an accountant, a financial planner. You're gonna find somebody because she had to have the lawyers, the judge were like, we need these numbers by like Friday, and it was a Monday, and I'm like, girl, I'm like, I can't help you. So she had to obviously quickly find somebody to help her, and it was a lot more in depth than what she thought. There was secret money accounts that she found out that through because the accountant was like, sketchy sketch. And so he was, putting money away and she just didn't know it. Like, I'm assuming he must have been planning this. And he's like, I'm just going to leave her with nothing, but I'm going to have my, hundreds of thousands sitting over here. And yeah, he didn't plan that very well.
I start really small. I have, girls that work for me. And I think this is a prime example of a very young person, especially women. And they work for me and we have a contractor that comes into a plumber comes in, and a toilet is not a rocket ship. And so sometimes some guy will come in and the girls get totally intimidated. He must be so much smarter than me. And I'm too afraid to ask any of these questions.
Mhm.
And then the guy leaves and the work is not done properly. And
Mm,
I love teaching them, and giving them that confidence to say, it really isn't, you're not alone.
yeah,
No one on this call right now cares about how toilets work, but
right.
it's not that we don't have the capacity to figure out and make it work. And so, and that right there is a very simple thing that I start with my people that are, in their very early 20s. And then, I'll give you my advice to women is that you are not alone. And a lot of people feel like they're alone. I felt like I was alone
Yeah.
when I was going through a divorce. I was completely alone. And even when I started a business, I belonged to Entrepreneurs Organization, and I gave this chat the other day. And when we first opened our first location, we got sued by Alliance, Ross Pro Jr., Hillwood. It's one of the largest, fastest growing parts of North Texas. And I get invited to a membership luncheon for Entrepreneurs Organization. And I showed up and I said, my problems are different. They're special. They're more. They're not like anybody else's. So I get to this lunch, and as we start talking, what the first thing I realize is like, there is nothing special about me. And that kind of fell over me like a warm blanket,
Hmm.
because I was in it with everyone else. There were other people that were like me. And, I didn't have other people like me when I was going through my divorce, but I had other people like me in my business, when I was
Yeah.
going through that terrible time. But the point of that is that, you're never alone. You just
Yeah.
need to raise your hand, ask for help. And there's more than enough people. I don't know anybody that if you went up to them and says, hey, I need some help, who's
Mhm.
going to say no? People love to help,
I'm,
you know? People love to help.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
yeah. I always say, if I don't know it, let's figure it out, or I'll send you to somebody who might, because, I'm not going to say I have all the answers because I know I don't. I'll
Yeah.
be the first to say, I don't know,
The first step is picking up the phone with 30-minute call with whoever that you need help with,
Yeah.
look, you're not going to be connected to them or signing some kind of crazy mortgage or anything like that. But,
Yeah.
30 minutes of a discovery call with any kind of person that you need to learn something to figure out. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I live in the country and I am not afraid to walk into Home Depot with a chainsaw and go, my husband needs chain, but I don't know what we need. I've
Hmm.
done it. I will walk in with a chainsaw. They look at me and I'm like, I just need help. I don't know. They're like, oh, or pictures on my phone. I'm like, here's all the pictures. This is the problem. They're like, then they take my phone, like, oh,
Mhm.
okay. They always know when I come in, they crack up. They're like, what do you need today? I'm like, I'm just kidding. Okay. So I have no problem going in chainsaws into Home Depot that they think I'm funny, but that's just me. So I have one more question for you, because obviously you went through your divorce. And so that was a complete identity change. How would you, or how would you tell a woman or talk to even a man that's going through identity change? It doesn't necessarily have to be you're getting separated. A lot of people out there are moms. Like, I'm a mom. In my last 20 something years, I have raised children. In 4 years, my kids are going to be out of the house. And so my whole identity for the last 24 years is going to be being a mom. And then I'm going to have a whole new identity. And I know a lot of women out there, or even just men too, if they're single dads, like their identity changes because their whole life has been either focused on their kids, or maybe you're now divorced and, you're no longer Mrs. or Mr. You're now Miss. And that's, a lot of people go through depression of that because they don't know how to handle that identity change.
Well, that's a really good question. And if you're going through changes like that, provided you already know what your values are and who you are, envision what 1 year looks like from now, or what 10 years looks like, what your future self looks like. That way it gives you purpose, and you could start working towards that, even subconsciously. If you have any type of goals, I mean, think about what you want. And that's harder than you think it is. We can make a list, as long as Santa's list, of all the things we
Yeah.
don't want. But what we do want is much harder. And to be able to articulate that, make it specific and measurable.
Yeah.
And I think it just takes time, that where you need to sit down with yourself and on a regular basis and make sure that you do the work. And when you start to write that stuff down, it comes to fruition. There's
Yeah.
not one thing that in my life I can honestly say that I truly wanted, that when I wrote it down and I thought about it on a daily basis, did not come to life for
Right.
me. I didn't ask to win the Powerball and do
Right.
all kinds of, ridiculous things. But, if it's something that you truly want, it means something to you, and you want to get there. If you write it down and you think about what the future looks like, instead of looking at the past, because we will always, if we continue to look at the past, that's how it's going to be. But if we look to our future self, then that's what we're going to become.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes,
Truth.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes. I just know a lot of my friends have children that are much older than mine, and they're, either they've, gone through divorce, they stayed for the kids as long as they could, and, now they're like a whole new identity, or, this or that, and they've struggled. And I've watched some of them now who are empty nesters, and they started having kids like in high school or right out of high school because we're the same age, and they're like a completely different path, than me. And they're just like, some of them are like, what do we do now? Because like all of their friends still have kids, but they're just like, and I'm like, the same thing that I did when you all had kids and I didn't. You just got to figure it out. You just got to figure out something you want to do and just go with it. That's just what I say. So some of them are going back to school and starting new careers now because they're just like, okay, kids are gone. I can go and do this.
Yeah.
Guaranteed you'll never get there if you
Yeah.
don't figure out where you want to go.
Exactly.
That's one of the reasons
you're
why
just,
I started the podcast. I wanted to do something because I knew in my mind, my youngest is 14. And I knew that like at the time, it was like 6 years ago, I was like, or a couple of years ago, I was like, he's going to be gone. What am I going to do with myself? I'm like, I don't have to drive them to school. I don't have to wake them up. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. And I'm like, that's what Satana. And she's like, yes. So, keep ourselves busy. And we love this. We want to see our podcast grow. We want to see, help other people. And this is, we love to be known as, hey, have you heard of Midlife Unfiltered podcast? This is what keeps me going. This is what I want to be. Obviously, I'm married. I'm always going to be a mom, but I want this to be part of my new identity, my new, for the future.
and it took some work. I mean,
Yes.
probably just didn't,
No.
fall in your lap. Yeah.
No.
And it's still taking a lot of work. It's still a lot of work. And it will always will be, because I think that you always are looking to make it a little bit better, or make a little bit improvement, or, just get yourself out there a little bit more. So it's fine, because to me, I feel like this is a challenge. And
Yes.
that's like the coolest thing.
People are like, Stella, are you making me money? Are you this or that? I'm like, it doesn't happen overnight. I'm like, we're slow and steady, which is what I love. Slow and steady. We're starting to see it grow, which is what we want and what we like.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. We truly appreciate it. Do you have maybe one more piece of advice you would love to give anybody that's listening where they can find you that really resonated with you as you were going through your new identity, your life change?
I'm going to say, ask for help. If you're going down a tough road, you can never do it alone. I mean, I've just had so much success when I've had people along the way that I had work, whether it was coaches, mentors, trainers, or anything like that. I think it's going to have so much more success if you do it with someone and borrow their courage and borrow their wisdom until you can get where you need to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the same person all the time. And you can download the Clarity Conversation tools on onekeyconversation.com/growth. And all of the tools will be there for you. They're free. Do it with a friend and bounce the conversation off of each other if you want. And I'm here if you want to talk to me.
And I will make sure all of that is linked below when this podcast goes live. So again, you guys, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to Marcel. She'd be more than happy to help you. And if she can't help you, she will guide you and direct you into the proper place. And again, like she said, don't be afraid to talk to your significant other or to your friend, whatever is bothering you, because 9 times out of 10, like she said earlier, that person that you want to talk to is like, yeah, but they are afraid, just like you were, to bring it up, because we're all sensitive, we're all humans, and we don't want to hurt each other. Well, most of us don't want to hurt each other's feelings. And so sometimes, it's just better take one for the team, bite the bullet, just do it. Just talk.
And, they write all of those books
Yes.
that fill libraries about other people. So they're out there.
Yes.
Anyone ever pick up a self-help book or something going, this is written like they wrote it about me.
To me.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
yes,
you're not that special. There's like probably millions of other people just like you. And that's why the book is written. So,
yep. And I was just real quick before we go, I just remembered my daughter when she was in high school. I think she was in high school. She really had something that was bothering her. And I said, well, talk to your friend about it. I'm like, just do it. And she did. And she came home and she's like, Mom, I'm like, yes. So she told me, I'm like, how'd it go? She's like, it went great. She's like, we're good now. She goes, it was just it was a misunderstanding. I'm like, see, that's all you had to do. Now they're still friends to this very day, but it was just a misunderstanding. I mean, she was so hurt by it. And I could tell that she was hurt by it. I'm like, if you just talk, I promise you, it's probably not, you're making it worse than you think it is. And I was right. But they need, they were teenagers, but now she knows how to, when things like that happen, she knows to go ahead and just talk about it, bring it up.
Yeah.
So,
it's the negative talk that we put in our heads that
we make all these assumptions and then, then it becomes fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so very much.
Yes,
really
thank you
appreciate
again.
coming on, and thank you so much. And yeah, like I said, I will link everything from your website to all your books down below in the description.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.